Michaela Kathleen, and in this video I'm doing a little office slash bookshelf tour. I actually had already posted the office tour in like a little 3-minute video a little while ago, but I had like intended on having that at the beginning of my September reading wrap up, but I had just forgotten to do it. And so then I just really quickly put together this little 3-minute office tour, and upon reflection, I was like, this video is trash. I'm going to delete it and do another office tour, but also do a bookshelf tour, because I did not do a bookshelf tour in that little office tour, and make it like a full video. But the reason for the office tour was that we recently had our window replaced, and during that process we had cleared a lot of stuff out of the room so it would be out of the way and also not potentially getting dirty or messed up. And so just kind of spur in the moment, because we had a lot of stuff out of the room already, we decided to just do a full rearrange of the office. And the reason that I am also doing a bookshelf tour with this office tour is because some of the books did get moved around. I have all the same shelves still, but when we settled on this arrangement with this chair, I realized that these shelves over here are a little bit like hidden behind the chair. Not terribly hidden, but a little bit. And in my original arrangement of my books on these shelves, some of my very favorite books were over on the left side of this shelf. So I decided that was no good, and I wanted to move them over to more visible parts of the shelves. So a lot of the book arrangement is similar to how it was. Some of the shelves are the exact same, but things did get shuffled around. That being said, I do not have any new books on the shelves, really. I mean, I do have new books since my previous bookshelf tour, but they would have been featured in wrap-ups and stuff anyways, because I don't add books to these shelves until they've been read. So it's just a handful, and things that I've talked about before, like some of the most recent adds to the shelf are like By Any Other Name by Jodi Picoult, Slow Dance by Rainbow Rowell, Lessons in Chemistry, books that I have talked about even though they probably weren't in the previous bookshelf tour. So yeah, this isn't gonna be like a naming off every single book on the shelves bookshelf tour. It's just gonna be like a general, here's how it got reorganized tour. But before the bookshelf tour, we have to redo the office tour that I have already given but since deleted. So yes, this may look familiar if you were one of the 4 views on the previous little office tour video that I had up for a day before I decided to shoot this one instead. And coming into the entryway of the office, the first thing that you get is my desk, which of course used to be under the window, but it got moved to this wall. And all of the bookshelves, which used to be on this wall, got moved to the opposite wall. We've just kept this one lonely little bookshelf over here. And then moving over, we moved these fantasy travel posters from our bedroom to the office. The Govee lights used to be on the wall opposite my desk, but we moved them here. I do not have the app on my phone to turn them on. These posters were here before, but one did get moved to the opposite wall. And then moving on past the posters to the window where my desk used to be, we now have a little coffee table and this chair. And the chair got moved here because my husband's desk, which used to be where the bookshelves now are, we moved out to the living room. And we are actually loving that. We like being able to sit on chairs at the desk and eat instead of sitting on the couch or on the floor in front of the coffee table. And we just now have this cute little reading nook in here because not all of our furniture would fit out there with the desk out there. My husband's shelves are largely unchanged for obvious reasons. They are attached to the walls. And our favorite part here, the bookshelves. They used to be, as I said, where the desk was, and now they are over here. And the Fault in Our Stars poster got moved over here as well. And as I said, in the next part of the video, I'll break down where all the books moved. The reason that I moved them again is because The left side of this little shelf is just slightly hidden by the chair, not too bad, but still, I wanted to move some of my favorite books over to the more visible side of the bookshelves and move some of the books that I don't care about quite as much to this ever so slightly hidden spot. But yes, the only part of this room that remains unchanged is the book cart. The book cart is still on this little bit of wall between the closet door and the door to the hallway. The closet is also unchanged. But yeah, that is the entire new setup in the office. We're really enjoying it. It looks really nice. It's very cozy. And now to the part where I show off which books got moved. So yes, we're back here for the bookshelf tour. As I mentioned, this isn't going to be every single book on the shelves, just more of a general, here's where things moved. So starting off on the top left here, the kind of genesis for the books getting rearranged, because I didn't want this shelf to be hidden over here in the corner. This shelf on the top left used to be the John Green shelf. The John Green shelf, which I will show later, got moved onto the tall shelves so that it would be more out there. And this shelf is now Twilight, the Lunar Chronicles, and the Jurassic Park duology. Little bit of a random collection there. And yeah, I will admit they're just not top priority books for me, and or they didn't maybe necessarily fit well within my genre arrangement that I have going on. So yeah, a little bit of a random shelf. Below that used to be the Scott Westerfeld shelf. This is the least visible shelf now as far as ones that contain books, because the very bottom one is one of my baskets of stuff. So this one now is a combination of nonfiction and stuff that I have written, whether that be stuff that I've had bound for myself, or also there are just a few like journals and stuff on here, which obviously my own writing is important to me, but I just don't feel the need to display it more prominently. Moving right along, over here we have my thriller horror shelf, and this one isn't super hidden, but because of how I ended up rearranging the tall shelf, these got moved over here. I ended up having a whole thought process for the tall shelf once I figured out that I definitely wanted to move John Green and Scott Westerfeld over there, which I'll have to explain when we get to the tall shelf. And then on the bottom shelf over here in the middle, which is probably not visible, I have the entire first two arcs of the Warriors series, and they are just lined up straight across because that was the only way that they would fit, which was a little bit sad. In my previous setup, the Warriors books were on the tall shelf instead of the short shelf, and those shelves are slightly wider. And so I was able to have the first series, which is all paperback, lined up vertically, and then the second series, which is almost all hardcover, was laid down on their sides. And it looked very nice, and now it's kind of boring, but hard to get exactly what you want out of every single shelf. And then hidden behind the Warriors series is the Charlie Bone series, which is also not ideal. I don't like hiding books behind other books, but it is what we have to work with, and Charlie Bone is just not the most important series of books that I own to me personally, so I have accepted that they are hidden. And then you can just barely see it poking up over here on the middle shelf on the far right of the short book shelf. We have a young adult shelf, and this one is far over enough that it's still pretty visible to the general room, which is good because this is one of my favorite shelves. This one is pretty unchanged from how it was before, just in a different location on the same bookshelf. It used to be the bottom shelf in the middle row, and now it's the middle shelf on the far right row. But other than that, it's set up pretty much the exact same as it was. The only thing that has changed is the decor that's on it. My Funko Pop of Belle from Once Upon a Time got moved over here, and then also one of my little book plushies is over here. And then immediately below that shelf, entirely out of frame, is a fantasy shelf, which contains the entire Inheritance cycle, not including Murtagh, which is up on my husband's shelves, the entire Game of Thrones, and an omnibus of the 3 Lord of the Rings books. This shelf is also set up a little bit less nicely than it was before, although this shelf has always been one of my least favorite shelves because arranging these big series in a single square shelf is just difficult. So I'm not too upset. It's not significantly worse than it was before. My little Frodo Funko Pop still fits, so that's what counts. And yeah, that's it for the rearrangement of the short shelves. I will give a close-up of each individual shelf at the end so you can see the arrangements I've been talking about for the ones that aren't as visible. But now we will move on to the tall shelf, which is where the real changes happened and the real concepts happened for the rearrangement. So yes, here we have the tall shelves. Completely unchanged on this shelf is the Harry Potter shelf on the top left. I did briefly toy with the idea of moving the more storage unity bookshelf in the closet out here so that I could have a wide set of shelves being used for books instead of just cubes. But that just didn't end up working out for several reasons. If it had, the Harry Potter books would have been moved onto one of those shelves so that the series could stretch out and have a little more room. A lot of the big fantasy series would have been going on those shelves, like the Inheritance cycle and Game of Thrones and stuff. Basically anything that just does not fit nicely in a cube. But that did not work out. So Harry stayed right where it was, set up right as it is. And actually this is one that does work pretty well on the cubes. I like how this looks. But after that, that's where things started to change with the decision that John Green and Scott Westerfeld would be moving over here to be more visible. And I ended up coming up with this concept of having 2 fantasy shelves at the top, 2 YA shelves next, 2 dystopian shelves after that, and 2 like more serious shelves at the bottom, kind of representing the range of genres that I enjoy in the order that I enjoy them for the most part. Although YA really does compete with fantasy nowadays for me. So because of that, Peter Pan got moved from the current John Green shelf up to the right side, right next to Harry Potter. Peter Pan is just one of my favorite franchises in general, especially one of my favorite fantasy franchises. Obviously, the Eragon shelf could have gone in that spot, but as I've mentioned, there's just no way to set up that shelf in a way that looks really nice. And I love how I have the Peter Pan shelves set up. I think it's really pretty looking. I like being able to see the cover of Fairy Dust and the Quest for the Egg and the cover for Tiger Lily. I have really great knickknacks to go with this shelf, more than just a single Frodo Funko Pop. So that's why Peter got priority over Eragon. So then of course below that I wanted to have my YA shelves, which I actually have 4 YA shelves, so obviously I could only pick 2 to be on the tall shelf. And of course one of them had to be John Green. That was just no getting around that. And then the second one, it had to be Rainbow Rowell. It had to be my shelf that had my Rainbow Rowell books. So that is how those ended up there. I will point out later in the video where the other YA shelves ended up. I've talked about one already, which was this shelf down here over on the short shelf, and then one was in the little lonely bookshelf across the room. And yeah, this one just doesn't really have a single standout author like the John Green shelf and the Rainbow Rowell shelf, so that's why it didn't make the tall shelf. But it does contain one of my top 10 books of all time, Kids of Appetite. So then moving down below the YA shelf, we have the dystopian shelf. And over here is just Scott Westerfeld, the Uglies series, his other books behind. And yeah, Scott Westerfeld is a top author for me, up there with John Green and Rainbow Rowell, so he needed to get moved from this hidden corner over here over to the more visible spot. And then over on the right side we have more dystopian books. Again, my top dystopian books for the most part. We've got The Last Book in the Universe by Rodman Philbrick, we've got the Hunger Games series, Handmaid's Tale, Thousandth Floor series, The Knife of Never Letting Go. I do have a third dystopian shelf that is across the room, and with that one I just had an author that I own a lot more books of, Neal Shusterman. I don't rate him as highly as Scott Westerfeld, and his stuff just didn't fit as well with the stuff over on this shelf. So he gets kind of his very own shelf across the room with a few lesser dystopians thrown in. And also his shelf gets the honor of having the book nook. And then finally, the very bottom shelf on the tall shelf that is out of frame are the more serious books that I own, but ones that I rate more highly than the ones that were over on the short shelf. So on the left, we have Frederick Bachman and Marcus Zusak and TJ Klune, authors that I love, and then some other standouts like Lessons in Chemistry and By Any Other Name. It is a shelf that I like a lot. The shelf next door, not as much. With that one, we're going back to more nonfiction, but it is nonfiction that I care about / enjoy more than the nonfiction that's over here again. And then, as I've mentioned, the short shelf over there has 3 shelves, so kind of following the pattern of this one, it's fantasy, YA, and then dystopian, but obviously I'm going to show that individually. And yeah, that's it for like the large rearrangement. Now we can zoom in and look at the shelves individually just to kind of get a close-up at the setup. So yes, these are going to be the close-ups as promised. These shelves were pretty visible in the video, but this is the close-up of kind of the random collection over here on the left and horror thriller over on the right. I do love when I can make it work to have a book facing out. Sliding down below that, we have the nonfiction and my books and journals down here in the most hidden position. And then below that, we have the Warriors, as I mentioned, just lined up. No variation. These were the ones that were turned on their sides back when they were on the tall shelf and the space was a little wider, but now they just have to all be lined up and it's not very pretty. And as I mentioned, Charlie Bone is hidden back there somewhere, you just can't see him. And then moving up and over, we've got beautifully framed lights back there and a YA shelf that is not hidden behind the chair at all, so I'm not upset about this location for these books. And below that, the fantasy shelf that is, you can really only see the Aragons, but that's how it was before pretty much. The Three Dark Crowns series also used to be on this shelf, but that was back when it was on the tall shelf, and again, those shelves are actually a little bit bigger than these shelves, so the Three Dark Crowns series got moved over to the lonely shelf across the room. And now moving on to the tall shelf. As mentioned, Harry Potter unchanged. Peter Pan unchanged, but in a new location. It used to be down here where the John Green books are, which this is a new location for the John Green books. And the main difference in the setup, because there's more room, is that You Are an Artist got to come out front. It used to be hidden in the back. Moving over to the other YA shelf. The first one on the short shelf is mostly YA books by male authors. This shelf is mostly YA books by female authors, or actually exclusively in this case, I think. And as mentioned, Rainbow needed a spot up front. And I also kind of love that the Anna and the French Kiss series got pulled to the front here. There used to just be, I think, Eliza and one other book on this side, back when these were on the short shelf, and again, the shelves over there are not as wide. So now I have room for the entire Anna and the French Kiss series over here, and the spines on these are just so pretty that I love having them out front. But moving down to the Scott Westerfeld shelf, pretty much unchanged other than Afterworlds over here used to sit below the Uglies series. But again, these shelves are wider and I was able to lay these on their sides, which I like. Although it is sad to have Afterworlds be hidden in the back. Over on the right here, you can see my TBR game behind the shelves is a little dystopian shelf that is pretty unchanged, just in a new location. And that candle is also not going to stay there forever because of Halloween decorations. It got moved in here for the season. And then down to the bottom, the more serious shelves on the left, we have literary fiction, I would say. One of my favorite authors, Frederick Bachman, featured over here on the left, and I mean, I've only read 2 TJ Klune so far, but I think he's also gonna be a new favorite author. And then yes, the right shelf, not as exciting, mostly nonfiction, some like picture books thrown in, a little bit of poetry, but there are some books there that I really enjoy. And now we're gonna move off to the lonely shelf across the room that we haven't even really seen yet, other than in the office tour. So as mentioned, this shelf mirrors the tall shelf across the room in that I have fantasy at the top, then YA, and then dystopian. The Charlie Bone up here is because I want to reread it soon, so that's kind of there so I remember that. But yeah, we have got this fantasy shelf over here. Like I said, the Three Dark Crowns series in the middle there got moved from the Aragon shelf over to this fantasy shelf, which this fantasy shelf I think of as more childhood fantasy slash fantasy written by female authors. Obviously Harry kind of stands on its own, Peter stands on its own, and then Aragon, Game of Thrones, and Lord of the Rings are all by male authors. And the books on this shelf are all by female authors. So we've got Daenerys up there. And then moving down to the YA shelf, this is just kind of the leftovers from the other 3 YA shelves. These are mostly like ones that I just don't like as much as the ones on the other shelves. This again is a shelf that is all female authors. One standout on this shelf is I do have 2 Jennifer Niven books over here. I've read 3 of her books now, 2 of which I really liked and 1 of which I did not care for at all and I unhauled. So I don't know, I was excited about her for a while. I haven't given up on her. We'll see if I ever read any more of her books and where they land. And then finally, kind of hard to get down in there, we have another dystopian shelf. We have all of my Neal Shusterman books on the left, the Scythe series, Dry, and Downsiders. Downsiders is not really a dystopian, but it is Neal Shusterman. And then the Book Nook, and then some dystopians that I just don't care about that much. City of Ember, Fahrenheit 451, 1984, and The Giver. And then Holes is not a dystopian at all, but it's one of those books that's actually just kind of hard to place. I guess it's a YA, but it just fit really nicely on this shelf, so that's where it ended up. But yeah, that was the entire office and bookshelf tour. I'll leave us on a faraway shot of the bookshelves before the outro of the video. So that was it for the office and bookshelf tour that was more in-depth and just better than the one that I posted very hastily. I'm really enjoying the new setup. It's fun and fresh and cozy, and I hope you enjoyed watching. Remember, words matter.